I don't know if anyone else feels the same way, but there's this thing that happens when you play a lot of video games. You start to kind of see between the lines, and you can spot the patterns and the tropes in enemies and level design before they've even really happened. You can, for example, look at a suspiciously empty massive room and know for certain that a big boss guy is going to appear the moment you walk in. You can spot a cracked wall and know you're going to unlock an explosive power at some point, and you can divine the location of hidden treasure by looking behind waterfalls because you've seen this stuff a million times before. Video game worlds being designed around common tropes and iconography is great. Not only do they make the design process a hell of a lot easier, but this kind of shorthand can be a great way to ease players into a game and let them feel like they're in control and the master of their domain, which can be great fun. However, many games out there are designed to be the opposite. They're all about throwing you in at the deep end of a hostile world that you don't belong in and forcing you to fend for yourself. But that's a difficult mindset to get into when, in the back of your head, you can't escape the feeling that this supposedly mysterious environment is actually composed of familiar pieces and was explicitly designed with you in mind. Look at two games that pride themselves on being weird and asking you to survive in a strange, twisted world: Journey to the Savage Planet and Control. Both games have weirdo, fantastical settings, but both lose their sheen very quickly because it's all too obvious that they're built on a foundation of comfortable, familiar tropes. Journey to the Savage Planet starts off strong, with your first few major advancements being utilising your disgusting space rations as bait and lobbing seeds around to create cool effects, but this potential quickly gives way to some very standard Metroidvania fare once you rip away the wallpaper. These weird blobs? They're just grapple points. These exploding flowers? Zelda bombs. Even these strange, gross orange slimes quickly get mentally filed away into standard video game health upgrade before long. And despite the genuinely good story and fantastic setting of Control, the game's attempts to suck you into an experience all about Lovecraftian weirdness and alternate dimensions of pure chaos bleeding into reality, the game is about as standard of a third-person action game as you can get, with even your crazy magic transforming weapon that can turn into literally anything only ever taking the form of the 4 standard video game guns: a pistol, an SMG, a rifle, and a shotgun. Okay, there is a 5th late game gun, but even then it's basically just grenades. Combine that with some boring enemy designs, and you get stuck in this weird limbo where the setting of the Bureau is fantastic and constantly surprising, but that weirdness is dragged down by some of the most bog-standard, generic gameplay out there. The issue here isn't that these games are bad, more so that the way you interact with them is at odds with the way they want you to feel. Games can be great fun when they take us completely out of our element and into unknown, strange environments where we feel like we don't belong. However, there's a conflict between feeling like a world is mysterious and indifferent to us and being able to spot the recognisable and comfortable design patterns that we use to make it, which remind you that this supposedly dangerous world was actually made specifically for you to have fun in. So, the challenge for games that want to create hostile feeling worlds is that weirdness and unpredictability isn't very much fun on its own. Just boot up LSD Dream Simulator and you'll be bored within 5 minutes. Games need a foundation of fun gameplay, but equally, the more tried and tested design tricks they use, the more compromised the illusion of an indifferent world becomes. It's a tricky one, but I think I've managed to find out a solution, and that solution is cats. Let me explain. During my research, I played a trio of games that each have fascinating approaches to their world design, and they all happen to prominently feature cats, which is why I've ordered and structured the 3 different approaches like so. A world that's good at making the player feel out of place can be challenging, alien, or turbulent, with the games that are the best at creating this indifferent feeling doing all 3. I'm really stretching the cat thing, but I'm in too deep at this point. Let's begin with what I think is the easiest way to make a world feel indifferent, and that is to ramp up the challenge. See, many games make the mistake of telling you that their environments are unpredictable and dangerous, but fail to really convey that through gameplay, with the enemies and hazards you're told are threatening actually being very easy to deal with, or obliterate entirely. Resident Evil 8's Sexy Vampire Castle is a great example of this. You get an almost exhaustive display of just how lethal Lady Dimitrescu and her daughters are, but when it comes to face them in non-scripted gameplay, it quickly becomes apparent that they're restricted to a relatively small area of the castle, and it's very easy to use your existing video game knowledge against them by hiding in a shop or a puzzle room which you know they won't come into. This creates this weird situation where the artificiality of these supposedly terrifying enemies is apparent almost immediately, and so the rooms with just regular zombies in are weirdly scarier because they don't announce themselves beforehand and can actually drain your resources because you have to fight them rather than just being made to run away a lot. The reason why Lady D and her kids are made this way is to help the player and avoid frustration. which is great, but in order to maintain that feeling of indifference, the threat and mystery presented by the world needs to have a tangible mechanical weight to it, rather than just existing through implication that quickly falls apart under scrutiny. This is why I love the Xenoblade games, because they are committed to having worlds that push back and aren't afraid to resist your attempts to explore them. Look at Xenoblade 3 for example, which, no, I'm not going to spoil any story content of beyond the fact that it contains a cat. The entire Xenoblade series loves bucking the open world trend by filling their environments with enemies that are way higher level than you that can and will just sort of own you if you're not paying attention. In this early game desert area, on top of dealing with some plot related peril, your helplessness is reinforced by these massive level 50 dinosaurs stomping across the terrain that can and will just kill you if you aren't careful with your AoE attacks. The same goes for the game's proclivity for springing encounters with elite enemies or even bosses on you without warning, many of which are much harder than the equivalent story baddies. This forces you to constantly remain on your toes and to assess every treasure chest and every battle for hidden reinforcements that could overwhelm you in an instant. Of course, Xenoblade's not the only series that has massive bastards designed to keep you in that fun sweet spot of not being able to completely master the world you're in. Many other enemies fill the same sort of role. Guardians in Breath of the Wild are borderline unkillable early on, serving as a soft gate for late game areas and constantly reinforcing the power that destroyed Hyrule and nearly killed you. While the Warcraft Stitches, at least before Blizzard chickened out, was a massive high-level zombie who would patrol down Duskwood's main road, normally its safest area, and wreck low-level characters just to freak them out. And Leviathans in Subnautica are the biggest, meanest fish in the sea, requiring constant vigilance as their distant roars remind you that you are an intruder in Subnautica's ocean and that you are never truly safe. Ugh. On that note, it's not just enemies that can add to a feeling of unwelcomeness in a game's environment. Many games use resource management to communicate that you're out of place. Whether it's food and drink meters, oxygen, or just a time limit, making stasis itself dangerous massively ramps up the tension of being in a given area. A particular favourite example of this is Outer Wilds' time loop, which constantly pressures you with the knowledge that you only got a limited amount of time before the universe explodes and you die, making even visiting planets you've already explored incredibly high stakes. With that said though, it's important not to confuse a perception of challenge with actually overwhelming difficulty. Making a game too hard can rip you out of an experience by making it feel just as arbitrary and artificial as one that's too accommodating. In any number of lazy jump-scare survival horror games, dying a bunch can actually create a feeling of security because death no longer matters to you, and allows you to experiment enough to start figuring out ways around the enemies. But in a game like Amnesia, where running away from bad guys is pretty easy, and dying from sanity loss is actually impossible, the game becomes much scarier because it keeps you feeling vulnerable and at the mercy of the spooky castle for much longer. This brings me neatly onto our second letter in my terrible acronym, and that is that some indifferent, unwelcoming environments work by being alien. And by that I don't just mean sci-fi, I mean that it can be detached from, or different to, the way that we perceive and move around in the real world. By changing a game's topography and the way we move around in it, games can drastically change how accommodating they feel. In games with conventional modern settings, like say Grand Theft Auto or Far Cry, it's easy to get into the groove of movement and navigation because you're playing as a human person in worlds your brain is already trained to get around in, both in-game and in real life. In something like XO1, on the other hand, which sees you playing as a weird, rolling, gliding spaceship in strange alien landscapes, simply understanding the way you relate to the environment takes a lot of work, and it can, in a weird way, kind of put you on edge, even if there's nothing dangerous, because you don't have that safety net of existing understanding to contextualize your experience. This sort of conceptual security doesn't just come from real life. As helpful as these little climbing guides are in Tomb Raider or Mirror's Edge for example, they subtly act as a mental, well, handhold that gives you peace of mind that you're going the right way and don't need to worry about falling off. But in games like Getting Over It and the in-development Lorne's Lure, the environments don't guide you and were designed not to facilitate your movement skills, but push them to their limits, allowing you to feel like you're struggling through on the skin of your teeth rather than allowing the world to pull you along. Probably the biggest example of this I felt recently was in a game called Hyperbolica, which is a puzzle game with the gimmick that everything takes place in hyperbolic space. Now that's a complicated geometry thing that I'm not really equipped to explain, but it basically means that space is curved in such a way that parallel lines will always diverge from each other and you can take 4 right-angled turns and not be facing the way you were originally. Yep, it's weird. And so, When you're faced with insane, mind-bending stuff like it taking exponentially longer to walk around a circle than across it, or horizons that aren't where you intuitively think they are, you've got to relearn the basics of spatial geometry as you play, making the game feel weirdly uncomfortable, even though it's actually lovely and helpful the entire time. This feeling is called the uncanny, and it's actually a big part of the best Lovecraftian stuff once you get past all the racism. Something that seems familiar, but operates in unknown ways, can actually be more disorienting than something you've never seen before. To its credit, this is something that Control, the game I mentioned earlier, does really well, with its municipal levels having this permeating sense of subtle wrongness that's absolutely great. Having to unlearn your assumptions and then relearn entirely new rules can keep you in that great off-balance frame of mind for much longer. But I think the best game at using the uncanny to create an alien environment is actually Stray, a game with a cat in that utilizes this change in perspective to make simple mechanics a joy to play with. See, most of the game takes place in rundown cityscapes and junk heaps that are easy to understand visually, but because you're playing as a cat, who moves and acts in very different ways to a person, you've got to think about these familiar spaces in new ways. You're in a world clearly designed for people, but in Stray, in order to progress, you need to think like a cat. This means looking for footholds or small crevices to jump in, while avoiding ground level as much as you can, because doors and streets designed to be easy for people to navigate are much use to you. And there are some great moments early on where your brain stalls for a second wondering where to go, before you realise you can just squeeze through tiny gaps or clamber up bookshelves to progress. The feeling, or the feline, of learning how to move as a cat feels really awesome, because it gives the spaces you're in a bunch of additional depth that you probably overlooked at first, with you seeing stuff like pipes not as background decor, but whole new alternate paths. However, this feeling of figuring out a whole new world can't last forever, and eventually you will get your head around being a cat and begin to notice certain patterns forming, like how air conditioners are basically Stray's default platform. It's a small thing, but spotting this pattern that's basically the result of the game's limited budget does take away some of the magic of its world design. It's not the game's fault, Stray is very visually impressive for what it is. It's just that humans are really good at recognizing patterns, and once we've identified the cold mechanical rules that govern what appeared to be an alive and unpredictable world, it's hard to treat it as an unknown quantity anymore. So, is there something that can be done about this? Well, I'm glad you asked. The third and final thing I want to talk about when it comes to making mysterious worlds is a little word that I've awkwardly crowbarred into an acronym called turbulence. And to explain what I mean by that, I need to introduce you to our third and final cat, Slugcat from Rainworld. So, the way the game works is that you play as this adorable creature called a Slugcat, which, as you might imagine, is half snail, half dog, who gets lost in a post-apocalyptic sprawl long since abandoned by sentient life and filled with dangerous predators, mysterious machines, and deadly, deadly rain. The most obvious way that Rainworld communicates that the environment was not built with you in mind is through its incredibly deeply realised ecosystem of horrible monsters that mostly want to eat you. Every single creature, from the lowliest fly to the biggest, horriblest, whatever this is, has its own systemic AI, and the game continues to simulate them even when you're in a totally different part of a zone. What this means is that the game is completely unpredictable, and organic AI interactions are constantly happening all around you as you try to scurry your way through each area. Lizards will start fighting each other to see who gets to eat you, offering a chance to escape. These primitive tribal creatures wander around the map hunting stuff, and you can use them as cover, and every single creature in the game has feeding grounds, territory, and even nests, your presence within them affecting the way they act towards you and other creatures. You might be able to map out the world and its fauna, stock up on stuff like lanterns, flashbangs, and even these cute little grappling hook worms, but you'll never be able to predict or control the way the game's myriad intelligences will interact, turning an already perilous journey across a big lake into Jesus Christ, what is that? Nope, no thank you. This element of unpredictability is key to the dangerous appeal of a whole bunch of different environments. For example, it's also why the maps of battle royales/extraction games can feel so wonderfully tense and constantly surprising. You could know the map, the enemies, and carefully prepare your tools for each engagement, but there's no accounting for how other real people will act, creating messy, rough and tumble engagements that can happen anywhere, at any time, leaving you constantly on guard and weighing up every risk against this unknown factor. It must be said though, that this kind of chaotic, knocking the player off balance needn't come from characters specifically. Just like in the case of making the world more challenging, this feeling can also stem from the more fundamental design of a world and can manifest in a variety of ways. What matters is that the player is kept guessing to the point that they can never comfortably predict what's happening next. Something like Psychonauts generates a great sense of novelty and apprehension, because each world isn't just a new backdrop for the same mechanics, but usually comes with a whole bunch of new rules and ways to think about the environment. like this charging bull that rampages through the level, or the entire world being a mini-game, or you being massive, or you having to navigate everything on a bowling ball. Equally, the Half-Life games do a fantastic job of making the world seem bigger and more complex than it actually is, by implying that there's an entire world just outside the near corridor that is every level. Every time you run into a scientist having their own struggle to survive in Black Mesa, every time the Combine ambush you from an inaccessible part of the city that doesn't really exist, and every time Alex runs into a little mini background story like this zoo that got overrun by antlions, the world feels just that little bit bigger and a little bit less predictable, even if every Half-Life game is basically linear. It's not until you realise that 90% of first-person shooters only put enemies directly in front of you that you realise how offsetting getting ambushed from all angles can be. Equally, this sort of chaos can be played for laughs. Going into The Looker, which is the spoof of The Witness, you think you know exactly what to expect, but the game uses that foreknowledge to screw with you, catch you off guard with sudden format changes, and build up the greatest long con I've ever seen in a video game, which I won't spoil. Whether a game uses danger, disorientation, or general randomness to create a feeling of a hostile world, one thing is shared between them. All these tricks are really doing is obfuscating regular fun design in ways that feel threatening or uncomfortable, but don't really hurt the game all that much. Ultimately though, no feeling of being an outsider in an indifferent world can last forever. Not only are games finite, but they wouldn't be much fun if you couldn't master them at all, and you could never get the satisfaction of beating territorial Rotbart, escaping the underground, or getting your own back on these horrible spiders. The most fun part of being on the back foot and struggling against a world that feels hostile is eventually turning the tables and taking the initiative, and we do that by learning the patterns and the rules that govern these environments. The Metroidvania is basically entirely oriented around this arc, starting you off in an uncharted wilderness with no power and limited means for you to defend yourself, and ending with you having built up a complete mental map of the world, as well as the means to get around and fight baddies easily. So, really, I think solving this problem of games that are supposed to have unfriendly, indifferent worlds actually feeling artificial is a matter of making this transition as smooth as possible. The abrupt realization of seeing an NPC creature's inner workings, or getting the handle on some funky controls too soon, puts you and the game at odds with each other, so the best games with hostile worlds can use the techniques I've mentioned to help control the speed at which we eventually master them. It feels weird to say, but as we play games and build up a subconscious knowledge of how they ought to work, it becomes more and more difficult to get into a frame of mind where a world actually feels unpredictable, because we've got that much more experience to fall back on. So, in a lot of ways, while developers can use some of these tricks to obfuscate the fact that they just want us to have fun, equally, we need to seek out weirder and more adventurous games as we get more experience with the art form, rather than expecting approachable, mass-market titles to have the same effect forever. Minecraft's survival mode might have been scary at first, but once you work out how it functions, that feeling quickly fades. So, instead of complaining, we should either make the most of this new, empowering experience, or find a trickier, stranger, or more chaotic game to recreate that same feeling of hostility. I guess what I'm saying is to get out there and go and play something that's outside your comfort zone, because not only do some of the best feelings of surprise, discovery, and triumph come from games that are willing to bend what you thought the rules were, but there's no better way to broaden your understanding of games as an art form. And maybe, just maybe, through a lot of training, you'll be able to get to my level and understand the true majesty and game design brilliance of Stray's dedicated meow button. Oh yeah, ooh, that's the stuff. Hello there and welcome to the After the Video bit. Thanks for sticking around and / or being too busy fighting a boss or something to change the video. In this section, I like to point you in the direction of some deserving internet people for you to check out, because let's be honest, if you've come this far, you've got lots of free time on your hands and could probably use something to do. First up, I'd like to introduce you to Buried Treasures, a review site by Rock Paper Shotgun alumnus John Walker, focusing on teeny tiny overlooked indie games that you probably never heard of. I've picked up some great recommendations from this site, and John is of course a delight to read in any format, so if you're looking for some great game recommendations, then there is an entire archive of them on the website. Go check it out. Secondly, it's time for the Patreon shoutouts, and I'm actually thinking of doing something a bit different and introducing a new tier that you can check out on the Patreon page linked down below. Once per video, I'm thinking I'm going to randomly select a shoutout given to me by my Patrons and read it out for you all here. As an example, here's one graciously provided to me by an existing patron, Dotwo, who gave me the idea. He wants me to tell you that this episode was brought to you in part by bees. 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 Have you thanked your local apiarist recently? They made this possible, along with all fruit. Bees. It might not work, it might be dumb, and I might decide not to do it after all and just refund people, but it could be fun. Anyway, for the rest of the people already supporting me on Patreon, they get early access to videos, their name in the credits, behind the scenes content, and even the occasional special exclusive update video from yours truly. And if that wasn't enough, they get the warm, happy feeling of actually supporting me in a way that YouTube's terrible ads don't. Meaning that if you are or ever were a patron, you get my eternal forgiveness for ad blocking my videos, because let's be honest, adverts suck. And if you donate $10 a month, you get a special voiced mention at the end from yours truly. Like these fine people, who are Alge, Andrew Labrano, Asaran, Alno94, Bjorn Kala, Brennan Spalding, Brian Notariani, Konstantin Amend, Corey Gerard, Cosmix360, Daniel Metjes, Das Kangaroo, David Setzer, Dirk Jan Karambeld, Dotwo, Diggy Dog, Digletier, Ecton, Edward Franklin Woods, Eugene Bulkin, Gazkul, Gretar Hannison, Jacob Dylan Riddle, Janos Fakete, Joey Bruno, Jordan Gear, Lee Berman, Lucas Slack, Mace54, Max Filipov, Knox, NWDD, Nate Graff, Patrick Romberg, Peter D. Tomasak, Philby the Bilby, Phoenix Thurikaz, Rajigar, Reddidex, Regal Rajex, Ray's Dad, Sheldon Hearn, Simon Jacobson, Steve Riley, Strateger in Ultima, The Forbidden Shrimp, Tin Markovic, Tyler Duncan, Whimsical Wisp, Zach Grendel, and Chow. Whew, that was a long one. Anyway, I will see you around. Stay safe out there. Bye bye!